These days, for Barcelona, it doesn't rain, it pours. Ever since Lionel Messi decided to hand in a transfer request after growing weary of how the club is being run, things have slowly gotten from bad to worse for La Blaugrana. First, they parted company with their former manager, Quique Setién, who was initially believed to have been the person who would guide the Catalan Giants to their former glory. Sadly, results showed that the team wasn't getting anything out of that deal, and so the veteran tactician paid the price for some really underwhelming results. Once he was fired, Barcelona moved swiftly to bring former player Ronald Koeman to Camp Nou. The Dutchman enjoyed a glorious playing career in Spain, and it was expected that he would be making the Spanish Giants play a much better brand of football. However, you can see for yourself how inconsistent Barcelona have been so far this season, with those teams that are almost always consigned to a relegation scrap seem to be playing against them with virtually no fear whatsoever. Barcelona are not in a very good place, and the team's issues off the field have also impacted performances. Only recently, Josep Maria Bartomeu was forced into leaving charge of the club after sustained pressure from the club's fans. Barcelona is a unique club in the sense that they're not run by a corporate ownership. Instead, it's the club's fans who decide the team's fate and who chairs the board. Whoever ends up being elected as the club's president is always on his toes, aware that the team needs to turn in good performances because if that doesn't happen, the club's ownership model will see him being discarded and replaced by a new person. You must be wondering, why are we talking so much about the club's ownership structure? Well, a lot of Barcelona fans are not going to like it when we say that the club's ownership model is something that's becoming quite outdated, and it might not be what's needed to get it out of the financial peril that they found themselves in. Quite recently, it was made official that Barcelona's net debt had climbed up to $1 billion, which to be honest is a lot of money. It is being said that if Barcelona are unable to tackle this situation, they might go bankrupt, which would be a huge shame. And this is where our argument about the practical application of a 100% fan-owned model begins. The main benefit of this model is that the supporters, for the most part, are key investors in the company and will always be loyal to the club. This community-owned model ensures that fans are ones making off-the-pitch decisions. This model also allows a club to maintain its values and identity, and the stadium is seen as the epicenter of cultural expression and regional pride. However, the problem with such a system is that it inadvertently creates a strategy that is short-term and an environment that tends to become highly political. Knowing that their future term at the office depends on the results, the senior management is always looking to go for quick-fire resolutions. A club's board would know that if they're unable to run the club properly, they might not get a second bite 4 years down the road. So therefore, in order to continue staying in the leadership role, the chairman is likely to continue appeasing the fans by designing strategies that are meant to cosmetically make the club an appealing product and keep them on the good side of the voters. However, if things don't work out, the one who's eventually going to be ousted from presidency is not losing a lot. Instead, it's the club's owners, in this case the fans, who are facing the consequences of poor policy decisions. A few years ago, a UK-based organisation, Supporters Direct, that works with clubs to develop supporter ownership and financial sustainability, claimed that under fan ownership, a club is able to make healthier financial decisions. The example of Portsmouth Football Club was cited as a case in point of how fan ownership can rescue a club. However, on the flip side, this doesn't necessarily mean that a club's main body elected by the people would prove to be a financially viable business proposition. In corporate strategic planning, the top management reevaluates its existing strategy by looking at opportunities and impending threats in the environment and by analysing the club's resources to identify its strengths and weaknesses. In order to be ready to come what may, the management also chooses to draw up several alternative pathways and appraise them against the long-term objectives of the company. However, what happens when the top management is a group of individuals selected to take charge of a company's operations based on a democratic process? From the outside, it does look like a great mechanism. People who are not necessarily involved in the day-to-day operations of a company get to decide who would suit the company best based on how these candidates portray themselves. A new man comes in and is aware that he has to make all the right calls in order to be deserving of another term. But on the flip side, this is a dangerous territory as well. People who are elected to run operations of a company are basically politicians, making promises of instant turnarounds and doing everything they can in order to stay on the good side of the voters. The moment a board is elected, the chairman is expected to come up with instant, short-term solutions to make things work. Sometimes a long-term vision is forgotten in favour of quick results that may or may not have serious consequences going forward. While these individuals are always held accountable, the downside of such a system is that the chairman's actions will always be designed to support his or her re-election. They make promises that are not always in line with the club's long-term viability, and even if they do manage to create something of long-term strategy, what are the chances that they would ever be able to enjoy fan support in the long term? It's really difficult to make the outsiders realise the importance of a long-term strategy, and even more difficult to make them see that a few setbacks doesn't necessarily mean the end of the world. Elected officials don't have any incentive to leave a lasting legacy, so they're always focused on making the voters happy enough so that they have a better chance of enjoying another term in the office. And even if things don't work out and they're voted out, the chairmen don't lose anything in reality. In fact, it's the fan-owned club that suffers the most. The example of Barcelona is a rude awakening of the pitfalls of a club's fate being given in the hands of fans. For several years, the Spanish side was a force to be reckoned with. They had an on-the-field strategy in place which worked. However, the last 10 years have not been great for the team in terms of its direction. Of course, it's understandable that the club's history forces the leadership into a corner where the team is expected to deliver. But at the same time, due to constant pressure from fans and a seemingly unrelenting spectre of not being re-elected forces the incumbent into making hasty decisions. Players are bought for stupendous amounts of money and thrown onto the field. A new man comes in and he does the same thing, giving the fans what they want, a team capable of signing the most expensive players and expecting to continue being a global brand both on and off the field. Eventually, there would be that one straw destined to break the camel's back. That's exactly what's happened at Camp Nou, with the Catalonian Giants being asked to repay €420 million in debt this year in order to avoid insolvency. The current debt is distributed between €480 million in the long term and €420 in the short term. The club's total debt stands at around €900 million. So Barcelona have only two options at the moment: either go for a period of austerity or go insolvent. The latter option is definitely not going to be welcomed at all, and the former option isn't a great one either, since the players would expect to be paid back over the next 4 seasons. Election campaigns are long drawn-out battles, where the presidential hopefuls seek to overpromise and once they assume their role, manage to underdeliver. For them, getting elected becomes the main priority, and every action they take, consciously or subconsciously, is born out of this necessity. Eventually, in their struggle to appease the club's fans for their own political advantages, the club's situation spirals out of control. As a consequence, the president loses the trust of the fans, which leads to him being backed into a corner where he either leaves of his own volition or clears his desk following a vote of no confidence. In 2020, the exact same thing happened to Bartomeu. Now, it's definitely very easy to blame the club's executives and elected body for showing incompetence, but part of the blame also lies in the fan ownership model. At the end of the day, a fan ownership model in letter and spirit will always treat the club as a sacred institution whose values are translated on the field week in, week out. Fans, regardless of their right to vote, can never be decision makers, and you would be hard-pressed to find a lot of fans who would understand the importance of long-term thinking, which is so essential to make the club a sustainable business proposition. For instance, it could have been in the club's favour had they decided to follow through on Lionel Messi's request to leave the club. His salary, despite his legendary status at the club, is part of the club's current debt conundrum, and you have to wonder if at some point Bartomeu did consider allowing him to leave. However, he didn't want to be remembered as the man who allowed Messi to leave for free, and, being more concerned about his term, an ill-fated one nonetheless, decided to force the player into staying on in a bid to score some points in the eyes of the club's ever-so-demanding fan base. This way, it becomes quite evident that a structure that is run by a democratic base might not be a solution towards making a football club a financially profitable business. We don't know what happens next, but in our opinion, it's clear that the club is in dire need of a more consistent ownership model that first clears out the mess that has been created by previous chairmen in the last decade, before setting up the right systems to make the club a more sustainable and risk-averse business.